Having designed a fun middle area for the map, I set my sights on developing a bomb site. A was the first one I made. I'd say that bomb sites are the most difficult part of a map to make. You have to factor in when the teams will arrive and from where, before placing in adequate cover and somehow preparing for retaking the bomb site once the bomb has been planted. When I started with this one, I wanted to ensure that each entrance offered different pros and cons and that no passageway was rendered obsolete. I also wanted many of the walls to be bangable. It's something that is remembered fondly by players from back in the days of 1.6. I like others having the frustration of knowing that if they knew where players were through the walls, that they'd be able to mow them down before even seeing them. It immediately raises the skill ceiling for the bomb site and brings about a lot of advanced and risky tactics for once players become accustomed to the site. With the very first version of the site, you'll see many of the features that remained in the final map. This wall here offers players a reasonably protected and stealthy route to the bomb site without being seen, but also makes players feel clever for hopping over it for a risky shortcut. The entrance from middle looks somewhat strange. I was imagining a one-way balcony that offered skilled players a quick route to the site if they perfected the jump. The CT entrance is lowered to offer them cover. I like the idea of using height to conceal players, rather than an obstructive wall. The site itself at this stage is uninspired and generic, and is way too easy to be dominated by snipers. I'd like to take a moment to talk about optimization. It's not something I've covered yet with the making of this map, but it's been in the back of my mind through everything I've done so far. What it effectively means is that it only draws the bits of the map that you're looking at, and that there's never too much detail drawn at once. Essentially, you don't have to consider it that much, provided you make a layout that works to the engine's strengths. With disparity, you can't see more than one key area at once. Bombsite A, middle and B are separated with curved corridors that deliberately obstruct the view from each other. This helps the gameplay and with the optimization. And now for the bit that will make mappers crucify me. If given the choice between good gameplay and optimization, I'd choose good gameplay. At this early stage, I'd rather be free to experiment with different layouts than already trying to optimize a map that runs at 500 FPS already. Once I do find something that's fun, however, I will then look at it and work out how I can get it to both play well and work within the engine's constraints. The only example I can think of with disparity is the view down middle. Of course it would run at higher FPS if you blocked off this view, but I don't consider it worth sacrificing one of the key features of this map for the sake of making an inferior version of the map run better. A lot of the time, things that help optimize the map also make the map play better in other ways. Having tall walls helps to hide parts of the map, but also serves to spice up the look of the map vertically. A huge amount of what makes the map look good is what's rendered above head height. Having a simple open sky everywhere is often the most boring thing you can do and doesn't help players to navigate your level. D Ruins is a great example of a map with a lot of detail vertically thanks to its tall walls. Anyway, on to V2. This is actually more similar to the final version than some of the later stages were. The entrance to middle has become a basic old passage. I figured that if the bomb was planted at B, then CTs at this site would appreciate a direct route to middle, much like Short A in Dust 2. There's still a ramp joining up the two T entrances. I like this in a way since it makes it feel more like a courtyard than a series of passageways, but also it makes the shorter T path far too risky and with little payoff compared with the more sheltered far route. With V3 I throw in a load of cover and tweak the far entrance a bit to make it further from the middle one. And finally, with V4, I replace the building near CT entrance with a lower area. The logic behind this is similar to that of the place in middle that I discussed in the last episode. Looking at this layout, the CT entrance looks nerfed compared with the three possible entrances the terrorists have. I finally get my act together and retweak the site for V5, adding in the sloped roof that I thought would make the site a bit different and would also provide limited and interesting cover for terrorists when guarding the planted bomb. The sloped cover in the underpass was to stop CTs from wanting to camp there, giving terrorists a bit more control over this area. At the moment it's a lot more like Overpass, where it's very difficult for CTs to find somewhere to defend the site from. These were the versions that I playtested most heavily. This site got a lot of positive feedback. Note the Gary spot here. One of my friends was quite new to the game and enjoyed positions that allowed him to camp, so I marked the best camping spots for him and called them the Gary spots. The far entrance is now more connected to the middle one to make it easier for terrorists to change their mind about which path they'd like to take, and the wood here lets CTs crouch and spam through the covered approach, much like apartments in Mirage. I eventually made the far entrance more powerful by giving it a height advantage, which also slows down CTs who are trying to rush the terrorists. This was one of the most difficult areas to get right, and it went through many different iterations, lengths and shapes before I settled with one I liked. Now this one is pretty much identical to the first release version. You'll see that I've also detailed the site. I'll be covering this in the detail part of this series, but it was really to get a feel for this map and to see what would and wouldn't work with this particular layout. Getting a colour palette ready also helps me to envision what other parts of the level would end up looking like. Bombsite A was the place that I experimented with this sort of stuff. I love adding references and paying homage to earlier maps of mine, almost like little Easter eggs. For Balfour and Kyrenia, I added hidden copies of Elysium's base, something that I was unable to do this time. However, I did manage to add a dangly thing. For Balfour, it was a brightly lit vine in a dark room. For Elysium, it was a hanging ceiling tile that I added several hours before the deadline and caused huge amounts of problems and almost led to us missing the competition completely. And for good old D to Geforce, it was a dangling bucket hanging from a barn-like structure. Yep, a bit of blatant copying going on there, but it's a lot of fun, so who cares? And that concludes Bombsite A. It is still to go through several radical rehauls, but that will be covered later. For the initial release, this was the site that people would have played on, and it was still considerable fun to play. Thank you for watching. And now for the most interesting bit of the video, the random playtesting clips. Without this, it would not be worth making a map. It's a social experience and I love showing people the map as it evolves over time, and other people enjoy their suggestions being added into later versions. And best of all, we have a laugh whilst doing it. We do occasionally get proper playtesting done as well, honest. Here I am, testing timings with Welshie and Balthazar.
Here we go, passing now. I just passed. I am now in cover. Yeah. I think you need to give us obstacles to go.
Here's me trying to retake the site from sneaky Tory Black.
Bomb has been planted. Terrorists win.
Here's a 2v2 as Gara and myself try to take Bombsite A. The bangable walls served their purpose well. Now for one of the larger playtesting sessions we had.
Whoa. Oh man.
What difficulty did you put the bots on? Behind you. Philip, can you read the message?
I don't quite know what this was. Looks like a slow motion free-fall fighting session we had at some point.
This is me, goddammit. Ow! Take my gun, you mother. I'm gonna die. What's with the slow-mo sounds? What the hell? That's amazing. Wow, that's awesome.
Marvel.
Let's have a slow-motion battle.
I believe that this was some testing for the knife video I made a while back.
Grab your gear, let's go.
Each and every round felt different, making it enjoyable to play time and time again.
Flashbang. Throw in smoke. I'm throwing a grenade. Planted.
I don't know where I'm going. We'll see if we're around. I saw your shadow and then just exploded.
Phil, you the person.
Let's go.
No, you don't. If you can run. Oh wait, you don't. Oh come on.
I was flying. Yes, you don't look behind you.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh!
Too slow.
Philip ends for the guys. Philip runs to spawn. It's going A. Planting the ball. Nope. The guy is not under a thing. Philip, you suck. Philip, it's the floor. It's made of wood, the floor. On the bridge.
You didn't do
And finally, here are a couple of clips of us playtesting and messing about on a slightly later version of the map.
Wow. Flying. Yay. I don't know why, but every time I come onto this map with you, for some strange reason, I keep double tapping W to make me run, like off Minecraft.
I hope this helps you to imagine what testing this map was like. It was jolly good fun.